A study just came out linking one daily soda to a 50% higher chance of serious cognitive difficulties in teenagers. And no, this is not another sugar is bad for you story, because the actual finding is way more interesting than that. The researchers weren't looking at weight gain or cavities or diabetes. They found a hidden pathway, a mechanism that nobody was really paying attention to. And it has to do with what happens to the teenage brain at night. So here is what Shofeng at Texas A&M University did. He took data from over 8,000 U.S. high school students, collected through the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2021. That's a big nationally representative data set. And he looked at three things: how often these kids drank soda or sports drinks, how many hours they slept on school nights, and whether they reported serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. The headline finding? Teens who drank soda every single day were about 50% more likely to report those cognitive problems. For boys, the odds ratio was 1.53. For girls, 1.49. That's a meaningful difference, but that's not the new part. We've known for a while that sugary drinks correlate with all kinds of bad outcomes. The new part is what came next in the analysis, because Fung ran what's called a mediation model. He wanted to know, okay, soda is linked to thinking problems, but what is the bridge between those two things? What's carrying the signal? And the answer, statistically, was sleep. Teens who drank more soda slept fewer hours. And those fewer hours of sleep were the thing connected to the cognitive difficulties. Sleep wasn't just sitting there as a side variable. It was the pathway. So now the question becomes, why would a can of soda steal sleep from a teenager? And this is where it gets really interesting, because there are at least two separate biological mechanisms doing this at the same time. The first one is caffeine. And most people know caffeine keeps you awake, but the way it actually works in your brain is kind of sneaky. Throughout the day, your brain accumulates a molecule called adenosine. Think of adenosine as a slow-building pressure that tells your brain, hey, you've been awake long enough. Time to shut down. It's basically your body's natural sleep timer. What caffeine does is it slides into the exact same receptors that adenosine uses. It fits perfectly, like a key that goes into the lock but doesn't turn it. So your brain can't hear the sleep signal anymore. The pressure is still building, the adenosine is still piling up behind the scenes, but your brain has no idea. Then when the caffeine finally wears off, all that accumulated sleep pressure hits you at once. That's the crash. Now here's the part most people miss. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 hours. That means if a teenager drinks a soda at 4 in the afternoon, half of that caffeine is still active at 9 p.m. A quarter of it is still circulating at 2 in the morning. And teenagers are actually more sensitive to caffeine than adults. Their brains are still developing. One study found that habitual teen caffeine users had about 20% less deep sleep activity at the start of the night and went to bed roughly an hour later than non-users. That's not trivial. That's a structural change to their sleep. But caffeine is only half the story. The second mechanism is the sugar itself. And this one is less obvious. Your brain has a group of neurons in the hypothalamus that produce something called orexin. Orexin is a wake-promoting signal. It's what keeps you alert. Animal studies have shown that chronic fructose consumption, the kind of sugar in most sodas, actually ramps up orexin production. So you've got caffeine blocking the sleep signal and sugar simultaneously amplifying the wake signal. It's a double hit. On top of that, the sugar triggers a blood sugar spike, followed by an insulin response, followed by a crash that releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And cortisol fragments sleep. It causes those random awakenings in the middle of the night where you're not quite sure why you woke up. Now, this matters way more for a teenager than for a 35-year-old. And the reason is something that most people, including most parents, have never really thought about. The teenage brain is not a finished product. It's a construction site. And the construction happens mostly at night. During deep sleep, the adolescent brain does something called synaptic pruning. A teenager's brain has roughly twice as many synaptic connections as an adult's. That's not a good thing. It's messy. It's inefficient. And during deep sleep, the brain goes through and eliminates about half of those connections, keeping the ones that work and cutting the ones that don't. It's like editing a rough draft down to a final version. But if deep sleep gets cut short, the editing doesn't happen properly. Then there's memory consolidation. When you learn something during the day, it sits in a temporary holding area in your hippocampus. During deep sleep, special brain waves called sleep spindles work together with slow oscillations to physically transfer those memories from short-term storage into long-term storage in the cortex. That's how studying actually becomes knowledge. If you cut that sleep window, the transfer doesn't complete. The information just fades. And there's a third process that was only discovered in 2012. It's called the glymphatic system. During deep sleep, the spaces between brain cells expand by about 60%, and cerebrospinal fluid rushes through like a cleaning crew, flushing out metabolic waste, including proteins associated with neurodegeneration. During waking hours, those spaces contract, and the cleaning basically stops. So when a teenager loses deep sleep, they're not just losing rest, they're losing brain maintenance. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, impulse control, all the things adults wish teenagers were better at, that region is the last to fully mature. It's not done until the mid-20s. And it's also the region most affected by sleep loss. There's less blood flow to it, less metabolic activity, and the balance between excitatory and inhibitory signaling gets thrown off. Teenagers already have less insulation on those neural pathways than adults do. Less myelin, so they have less of a buffer against the effects of poor sleep. Mary Carskadon at Brown University, who's basically the pioneer of adolescent sleep research, calls this whole situation a perfect storm. Because it's not just soda, puberty itself shifts the internal clock later by 1 to 3 hours. Melatonin, the hormone that tells you it's nighttime, starts releasing later. The circadian rhythm literally stretches out. And then on top of that biological delay, you have school starting at 7:30 in the morning. Carskadon measured this and found that for many of these kids, biological night is 8:30 a.m. They're sitting in second period math class and their brain thinks it's the middle of the night. So you have a brain that's already chronically sleep deprived by design, and into that fragile situation, you drop a daily soda. The caffeine pushes bedtime even later. The sugar fragments whatever sleep is left, and the deep sleep stages where the brain is supposed to be pruning, consolidating, and cleaning get shortened or skipped entirely. And then comes the vicious cycle. Because tired teens reach for stimulants. They drink more soda the next day to get through class, which steals more sleep, which makes them more tired, which makes them drink more soda. Carskadon has documented this loop directly. She found that sleep-deprived teenagers were far more likely to use caffeine and nicotine just to function. And experimental studies have shown that when you restrict a teenager's sleep, they actually start craving sweeter, higher-calorie foods. So it's not just that soda steals sleep. Sleep loss also drives you towards soda. The thief and the victim keep swapping roles. Now, there's a detail in this study that I think is the most fascinating part, and it almost gets buried. The researchers didn't just look at soda, they also looked at sports drinks, things like Gatorade, Powerade. And here's what's strange. Sports drinks often contain zero caffeine. They have sugar, yes, but typically about half the amount of a regular soda. And yet Fung still found a sleep mediation pathway for sports drinks, at least for boys, which means the caffeine explanation alone doesn't fully account for what's happening. Something else is going on. Maybe it's the sugar and insulin dynamics on their own. Maybe it's the timing, kids drinking them after evening practice. Maybe sports drinks are just a marker for a whole cluster of late-night behaviors. Screen time, snacking, later bedtimes. The point is, this isn't as simple as caffeine equals bad sleep. The pattern is bigger than any single ingredient. Okay, but we need to be honest about what this study can and cannot tell us, because the limitations here are real and they matter. This is a cross-sectional study. That means it's a snapshot. All the data was collected at one point in time. We don't know what came first. Did the soda cause the sleep loss? Did the sleep loss cause the soda craving? Did something else entirely, like stress or anxiety or excessive screen time, cause both? Cross-sectional mediation analysis, where you test a causal pathway using data from a single moment, is actually a controversial technique in statistics. A well-known methods paper from 2007 explicitly warned that this approach frequently generates biased estimates for processes that actually unfold over time. All of the data is self-reported. The kids estimated their own soda intake, their own sleep hours, and their own cognitive difficulties. There's no actigraphy, no polysomnography, no wearable sleep data, no standardized cognitive testing. The cognitive measure itself is a single yes or no question that lumps together concentration, memory, and decision-making under a broad umbrella that includes physical, mental, or emotional causes. It's not a clinical assessment, and about 45 to 50% of students in the 2021 survey answered yes to that cognitive difficulties question. That's an enormous number. And 2021 was a pandemic year, so how much of that is soda-related versus anxiety-related versus isolation-related? The study controlled for age, sex, and physical activity, but it did not fully account for socioeconomic status, screen time, overall diet quality, or mental health. All of those things correlate with both soda consumption and poor sleep. So let's be precise about what we actually have here. We have a statistical footprint, a pattern in the data that is consistent with the hypothesis that soda disrupts sleep and disrupted sleep impairs cognition. That footprint is plausible. It lines up with decades of laboratory research on caffeine, sugar, and sleep. It lines up with animal studies showing that adolescent rats fed high fructose corn syrup had impaired spatial memory and brain inflammation, while adult rats on the same diet did not. It lines up with a 2025 Cambridge and Fudan University study that used Fitbit data from over 3,200 adolescents and found that even 15 extra minutes of sleep produced measurable differences in brain structure and cognitive performance. But a footprint is not a video of the crime. We don't have proof that soda causes cognitive decline through sleep disruption. We have a very good reason to suspect it does, and we have a clear roadmap for how to test it properly. Longitudinal studies, objective sleep measurement, timed beverage tracking, standardized cognitive assessments. That's the study someone needs to run next. What we can say is this: about 4.2 million American teenagers drink soda every day. 77% of high school students are not getting enough sleep. Only 23% report getting 8 or more hours on school nights, and that number has been dropping since 2013. A single 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola contains nearly 10 teaspoons of sugar, almost double what the American Heart Association recommends as the daily maximum for children. And the average soda size has ballooned from 6.5 ounces in the 1950s to over 16 ounces today. Meanwhile, being awake for just 17 hours produces cognitive impairment equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. Your reaction times slow by up to 50%. At 24 hours without sleep, you're cognitively equivalent to being legally drunk. Carskaden tested sleep-deprived teens and found that half of them showed alertness patterns identical to narcolepsy patients. Not similar to, identical to, and there's a broader context here worth knowing. As of January 2025, a joint recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and the American Heart Association now states there is no safe amount of caffeine for children under 18. Not limited. No safe amount. That's a significant shift in official guidance. Soda taxes where they've been implemented have actually worked. Berkeley's penny per ounce tax cuts soda consumption by 21% in the first year and 50% after 3 years. Philadelphia's tax reduced in city soda sales by 46%. About 40 countries worldwide now have national soda taxes. But here's what I think is the most important reframing from this study. For decades, the conversation about soda and health has been about weight, about diabetes, about cavities, things that accumulate slowly, that feel abstract to a 15-year-old. This study redirects the conversation to something immediate, something a teenager can feel right now. The ability to focus in class today, to remember what you studied last night, to make a clear decision this afternoon. Those aren't abstract future consequences. Those are happening tomorrow morning. And the mechanism is almost poetically simple. Your brain builds itself at night. Soda disrupts the night. Therefore, soda disrupts the building. The strongest version of the practical advice is also the simplest. If there is a teenager in your house, Look at what's in your fridge. Because the sleep thief doesn't break in through a window. You bought it at the grocery store and put it on the second shelf. Whether this one study is the definitive proof? No. It's a cross-sectional analysis with self-reported data and real methodological limitations. But the direction of evidence from neuroscience labs, from animal models, from population surveys, from sleep research, it all points the same way. And the cost of being wrong in the cautious direction is what? Your kid drinks water instead? So the next time you see a teenager zoning out in class, struggling to remember what they read, making impulsive decisions they can't explain, maybe the answer isn't that they need to try harder, or pay more attention, or put down their phone. Maybe the answer is quieter than that. Maybe it was sitting in a cold can at 4 p.m. yesterday, blocking a signal their brain was trying to send, stealing a few hours of construction time from a prefrontal cortex that won't be finished for another decade. The science keeps moving. The questions keep getting sharper. And if you want to keep up with the discoveries that actually change how you see the world, you know where to find us.